James Baldwin, the great author, said, "The world changes according to the way people see it." And if you can alter, even by a millimeter, the way people look at reality, then you can change the world. If you can alter, even by a millimeter, the way people see reality, then you can change the world. That quote alludes to something. It alludes to a power. It alludes to a consciousness. It alludes to something that can transform our world, not by changing the outside, but by a shift in consciousness that then affects an external change. So who in here thinks that'd be a lot easier than managing what's going on in the world and in your lives? Right? Then figuring out how to figure it out mentally, emotionally, physically, politically, right? So that power is something that we practice here. That power is something that in unity we call consciousness, we call God consciousness, we call it the awakened and enlightened state of being that flows in us, through us, that we are here to bring to the world. Our fifth principle is to act. It's that knowing these ideas is not enough, that we must align our actions with our ideals, with our spiritual practice. There's a lot of suffering, is there not, going on in the world? A lot of seeming chaos, and probably you could ask any generation that lived throughout time whether or not it looked like the end of times, whether or not it looked like they were seeing some of the worst of times. And probably every generation that ever lived would have experiences in the human condition to point to here and now and say, this is it. It's all going down. Revelations is here. If you really look throughout history, you could see that pattern. So, if that pattern is part of the human condition, how are we to use our co-creative power, our perspective of reality, to shift and elevate the human condition into a spiritual condition, so that we may be living beyond our circumstances, that we may live beyond our experiences, that we may elevate our awareness, elevate our consciousness, and live high, live mighty, live righteously, live the life we're destined to live? People are every day taking on the practice of challenging their assumptions, challenging their realities, challenging their perspectives. That's what we're here to do. People are waking up. Can you see it? People are waking up. They're waking up to their God-given ability and their power to ideate and co-create their own lives, to ideate and co-create collectively the world that we live in. There's still a big energy of feeling pulled back, though, is there not? So how do we be in both? How do we know our power and be in our truth and be present to the reality that we see around us? Well, we begin by learning, do we not? Learn. We learn, and we've learned things like the effects of anger. We've learned what the effect of anger is. We've learned what the effect of resentment is. And we've learned, have we not, what the effect of fear is. So if we're aware and we know what the effect of fear, resentment, and anger are, and we have a spiritual practice, then what is ours to do when these things present themselves? The human condition would just take them up. The human condition would just receive whatever comes at it and say, here I am, affect me. But the spiritual condition operates by a different law. The spiritual condition activates. The spiritual condition shifts perception, which shifts reality and transforms. It gets out of those limited conditions, knowing full well that it is our right to take them on, knowing full well it's common, knowing full well that it is each of our opportunity to take on any bits of fear, anger, resentment, and limitation. If you want to convince anyone that you have the right to be in that state, I don't think you have very far to go to convince anyone that that is a very natural and normal response. I don't even think anyone would hold it against anyone for reacting in this way. But if we're here to elevate our game, if we're here to raise the level of consciousness, if we are here, in fact, to do what the master teacher said to do, which is we will be doing and going on beyond greater things than we have seen before, greater activities, greater actions, greater consciousness than we have seen demonstrated before, will be demonstrated. Not by future generations, but right now, by you, by me. One of my biggest pet peeves, and this is going to sound funny, but it's one of my biggest pet peeves, is that we always say, the children will solve it. They are the future. We say, there's so much light there. Look, they haven't inherited our limitations. They haven't inherited this and that. They don't operate according to these limitations. The environment, they'll solve it. The problems with religion that cause hate, cause suffering, they'll solve it. It's one thing to believe in our children, and it's one thing to believe in future generations. It's another thing to use it as an excuse. It's another thing to skirt our accountabilities and to skirt our responsibilities and not to stand in this moment and say, this is the paradigm that has been going on in the human condition from the beginning of time, and it stops here. I will not hand it off with a bunch of tools and say, here you go, here it is. We didn't do anything about it on our watch, but I know you can because you're the future. Feel that difference? That distinction? If there is something to be solved, if there is something to be overcome, it can be overcome in every moment. In the moment we are aware that there is a need for an overcoming, there is also the ability to tap into the awareness of the solution. Because as you ask, you receive. That is immutable law. So it is impossible at the time of the conception of a problem that there is not also the creation of a solution that is simply ours to tap into, to activate. When we're willing to do our work, when we're willing to be accountable and not pass it on to the next person, people are waking up. Have you heard the story about the Frenchman, Anton Lenny? Anton Lery? Anyway, he is the man that, if you haven't seen it yet, he's had over 100,000 shares on Facebook, and his wife died in Paris that Friday. She was shot. He has a 17-month-old son, and he wrote a plea. He wrote a letter. He wrote a public expression. And his public expression on Facebook went something like this. You may have taken what is most beloved to me. You may have taken my wife, but I will not give you anger. You will not have my hatred. I'm going to read a little bit from his post. He said, if this God for whom you are killing blindly made us out of his image, every bullet in my wife's body would have been a wound to his heart. So no, I don't give you the gift of hating you. You're asking for it, but responding to hatred with anger would be giving into the same ignorance that made you what you are. You want me to be afraid, to view my fellow countrymen with mistrust, to sacrifice my freedom for security. You have lost. I saw her this morning. He goes on to say that he will raise his son in this way, and that every laugh, every moment of joy that his son has living a free life will be what he creates. And he ends his post with, you will not have his hatred either. How easy would it be to respond in a different way? How absolutely, seemingly acceptable, right, would it be to respond in an entirely different way? Think about the 17-month-old boy growing up. His father has a commitment, doesn't he? His father has made a commitment that you will not have his hatred either. That means there's a consciousness that is going to surround the rearing of this child when he learns about his mother's death, when he learns why he walks every year without a physical mother on this plane. Something so powerful has been shared, right? He has shared that it's not that he will walk this planet without a mother. He has shared that she is there. He feels her. She is right there with him. And anger and hatred will not be inherited. That the deed is done, and they will move on. Because moving on is necessary. Moving forward into the present moment is necessary. St. Francis of Assisi says, start by doing what is necessary. Then do what is possible. And suddenly, you are doing the impossible. This man started with what was necessary, being present to his feelings, being present to his practice, protecting his child in the highest way, protecting his mind in the highest way. And then what came next was doing what is possible. And then how did it end up? It ended up by doing the impossible. Some people would say it's impossible to have hope. It's impossible to have joy. It's impossible to have light in times of darkness. You would think, right, that it's impossible to inspire hundreds of thousands of people when you're in the middle of grief, when you have a great opportunity in front of you to take on anger and hatred. But he, by following his heart, was able to inspire, was able to do something that was divinely ordained, divinely appointed, because he took it on. Because he said yes to love, said yes to life, said yes to the healing of the moment. So it went from something that was impossible, like who could inspire people at a time like that? But he has. He has inspired a nation, and through inspiring a nation, he has inspired people all around the globe. Martin Luther King said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." If you were present to another video that circulated in the last bit of time here, it was a video of a Muslim man with a blindfold on, and he stood in the middle of a public area, open for hugs, asking for hugs, sharing his light, sharing that I'm not a threat to you. I am not that which you saw. And the video shows person after person coming up to give him a hug and to embrace. People of different religions, people of different backgrounds, people of different ethnicities. Think about the courage that moment took. If anyone's been marginalized, you know how dangerous it can be to be a marginalized individual and go into a place, right? Or to be thought of as a hated group. So he could have been attacked, right, at any moment. He could have been killed. And on the same note, the people around him could have been in fear that there was something strapped to his body that would harm them. But in a moment of love and a moment of courage and in a moment of overcoming conditioning, what happened instead was a holy instant. A healing where people claimed their power to not be overcome by fear, where people claimed their power to change reality, to change paradigms, to shift thinking, and to acknowledge the light, to acknowledge the good, and to create healing through love. To create healing through love. People are waking up. We're breaking paradigms. We're breaking out of the boxes that constrict. We're breaking boundaries. There was even something that I saw about refugees coming in these big boats to an a Greek island, and there was a Christian coalition there that was receiving them. And the guy doing the interview was saying what a delicate and sacred process it was, but he was saying that he feels grateful to show them that Christian love is here, that there are Christians that are caring, that are loving. And if you can think for a moment about the boxes that we can be in our minds when we don't have firsthand experience. Ken Wilber does a lot of work on, he's an author and a psychologist, he does a lot of work on boundaries versus lines, and those are the labels, the distinctions. And when we just have a distinction for the purposes of mental understanding, that's fine. But when that distinction becomes a wall or becomes a boundary, then it limits us. And so there are a lot of limitations, no, when we grow up in our own circles. So there can be a limitation when people teach us that all people like this act like that, all people that are this are that. People that are not of your family, not of this, not of that, are this. But one thing can break that. One thing can break that, and that's experience. Experience, firsthand experiences, are one of the only things that can break through those conditionings. Has anyone had that experience themselves? Maybe you grew up thinking this or that, and then you met someone that was this or that. I have it's coming out, and I didn't want to share. Whatever, I'm going to share. I have one of my favorite, maybe my favorite relative groups, and let's just say there's some paradigms that are limited as far as who, you're excited about being around kind of things. But one by one in this family, each child married someone that was on the fringe, let's just say. So one after another, the first one marries, and it's kind of like, ooh, but, and then the next one marries, and it's like kind of even more. And then the next one marries, and it's even more. So what happened? A breaking down of the limited paradigms to see love. Because when there is love there, when you love your child, you're willing to break some of your limited thinking to embrace love. It's known that there are so many people in the gay community, right, that had families that may never have been able to see the fullness of love had their not their child, their very own child, been gay. And that woke people up, right? Because when you have a firsthand experience with God as love, individualized in a person, your limitations have no room there, right? Your limitations have no room there. They cannot exist there. You start recognizing that there's a false prophet in there speaking words that are not of wisdom, right? So what I believe is happening today is that we're entering this realm of transparency. We're entering this realm of consciousness. I always say that the church of the future, people say the church has no future. And I say the church of the future is a congregation of consciousness. It's a congregation of like-minded, high-thinking individuals of consciousness that are willing to practice principles. That's the congregation of the future. Whatever it looks like, we'll all see. But that is happening, is it not, in every religion, in every paradigm that we are witnessing in this day and age? People are waking up. The labels no longer define the people. And the love that binds us is the love that heals us, and that's the love that people are starting to recognize is the most important element. There is a program that was just shared with me. It's a program in Kansas City that was started by an individual who came back from war with post-traumatic stress. And they have begun an organization called Warriors Ascent. And I also found other ones like Warriors and Wolves. But there is work being done to bring people together into healing in ways that break the walls down and break the boundaries, where traditional therapy didn't work, where traditional help didn't work. And there are people stepping out and standing up to help each other get out of anger and fear and trauma because of the acknowledgement that that's no way to live. People are waking up. In this Warriors Ascent program, they share that 80,000 veterans take their lives each decade. 22 veterans die by suicide each day, and at least 800,000 veterans are suffering from PTS. Now, regardless of how anyone feels about war, how do we feel about people feeling hopeless? There's no person on this planet that needs to be hopeless. There's no person on this planet that can't be helped. So this program is bringing people together and engaging them in a different system of healing, right? If we haven't figured out what works, if you haven't figured out your prayer life, if you haven't figured out your prosperity life, if you haven't figured out your healing life, keep trying, right? Because you may be one of the ones that is not going to be helped by what someone else did in the past, but is going to invent or put together a new concoction of what that is so that you can give it to other people. So do not stop trying, amen? So these people put together parts of Joseph Campbell's work in the hero's journey. They put together mindfulness practice, walking labyrinth, having practices that reconnect people with their soul, and doing deep practices of healing work and forgiveness work to alleviate the suffering, and then bringing people back to help in the healing of another. What people can do when they're awake is miraculous. It is godly. What people can do when they're not resigned to the conditions, but they're inspired and they're engaged, floors even the most jaded. The Warriors Ascent program says that their program helps veterans to discover how they can live a good life despite suffering, and to teach others who are suffering so that they can do the same. And there's a quote on there from Bruno Bettelheim. I'm getting my words funny today. From Bruno Bettelheim. He says this: the good life in Freud's view is one that is full of meaning through the lasting, sustaining, mutually gratifying relations that we are able to establish with those we love, and through the satisfaction we derive through knowing that we are engaged in work that helps us and helps others have a better life. A good life denies neither its real and often painful difficulties, nor the dark aspects of our psyche. Rather, it is a life in which our hardships are not permitted to engulf us in despair, and our dark impulses are not allowed to draw us into their chaotic and often destructive orbit. So recently we had an experience here in Kansas City of coming together. We had an experience of coming together for a purpose and coming together with an energy field. And we talked about it a couple of weeks ago with the Royals. And I also talked about that analogy of a snowflake, and that a snowflake by itself is pretty light and has very little impact. But when you put a lot of them together, you can have what? An avalanche. And that's what happened with the Royals, isn't it? One person in a sea of blue would have been one fan, but instead we had a field of blue, and we had a community. Over 800,000 people gathering together for a purpose, for a point, for an energy field. In the conversations about that last Kansas City experience with the Royals, it may have come to your mind, and I know it came to some because the conversation came to me. That was about sports. So people came together about sports. With all the things going on in our world, how trite, right? To come together around sports. And the frustration came of why don't we do that about the things that are going on in our world. We are standing on the precipice of global climate change. We're standing on the precipice of world war. We're standing on the precipice of, this engaging chaos at a whole nother level, or maybe we just have the internet and we can see more of it. But why are we not bringing 800,000 people to the center of Kansas City to make a stand for things that alleviate suffering in the human condition? So the spiritual practice is to flip that. And rather than to say, why not, to say, what if? What if? What if these experiences that people have of coming together and feeling what a field of vibration, a field of consciousness, a field of action looks like, to see what effects it can have, to see how it can change laws, change rules, change conditions, to see how it can really feel. What if those are the avenues of which we're willing to listen at this current time and place? And they are so valuable because it doesn't matter what avenue it comes. People need the experience of hope and seeing how transformative it can be when we come together. So whatever it comes through, that people can have that experience and know it as real. Let us say yes and say, and now we will replicate it. And now we feel our power. And now we will see what it's like when we demonstrate that kind of energy in this way. See, that experience I see as a precursor to feeling our spiritual power. And who else to feel that but a bunch of sports people? To have felt that experience, so when someone else says something about coming together, now we need to do it for this, people won't go, that'll never happen. We know that it happens. We know what it feels like. Let us not diminish the feeling, but let us see it as the beginning. Let us see it as an experience that was born in so many people's hearts, that can be born all over. This is the experience of the Christ being born. This is the experience of the master teacher walking the path. This is the experience people have had with gurus and saints and sages throughout time, that they have experienced an expansion, and they've been in the midst of it, they've felt it, and they've said, that's what we're about. That's what we're capable of. This is what we can do. So let us apply ourselves. I just recently saw the movie The Suffragettes. And in the movie, there's a book that's, I'm not going to give you any, the really good stuff, but don't worry, you can still see it. There was a book that was passed down from woman to woman. It was the book Dreams. And in there it had this quote in the movie. The woman wanderer goes forth on the path towards freedom. She wonders, am I alone, utterly alone? Why do I go to this far land? And reason says to her, silence, what do you hear? Thousands, and they beat this way, the feet of those who follow you. Lead on. The feet of those who follow you. In a moment, recognizing that we are to lead on, not to pass on the limited conditions, but we are to lead on into the future with courage, regardless of what it looks like. Everyone's probably heard the story of the 100th monkey. That idea that the researchers back in the 50s and then reporting in the 70s were working with a group of monkeys. Those monkeys learned to wash sweet potatoes and started passing that down. Isn't this fitting for Thanksgiving, the story? They were washing sweet potatoes, which I was doing last night for the Thanksgiving potluck, and they were passing them down and passing that knowledge. And so then the little monkeys started learning and they started teaching, and now all the monkeys here on this island knew. And then what happened when they say the 100th monkey learned that practice? Then it was a tipping point. And in unrelated places around the globe, monkeys knew how to wash potatoes. They knew how to wash their food. But they didn't have to have contact. How does this match spiritual law? How does this match our spiritual practice? That when we get something, when we demonstrate an idea, when this man in France demonstrates an idea and says, I am waking up, and publicly says it, it catches on and people are waking up. People are realizing that no injustice is worth making my whole life, my whole being dedicated to anger and hatred and resentment. People are recognizing that when I'm in that field of consciousness, the perpetrator is gone, off having their merry little life. And I am still suffering from the injury recreated over and over and over again. That is a hard message to get into a mind and into an ingrained system. It's like a family waking up. It's like someone with a limited belief waking up. But people are waking up to it over and over and over again. Donna Brazil said, "Why you? Because there's no one better." She said, "Why now? Because tomorrow is not soon enough." In unity, we have the gift of knowing the power of our minds, the power of our practice. There's a man who invented that energy drink, the 5-hour energy drink. And he became a billionaire. And he thought to himself after that, I've got to do something to give back. I can't just have received this and not be creative with it. And there's a great documentary online about it. So he created a company that would invent and explore anything and everything to help the human condition. What a great person to turn into a billionaire, eh? Manoj Bhargava, and he said this: how can we make a sizable difference to alleviate human suffering? The more wealth you get, the bigger your duty becomes, which is to help those who have less, who are suffering. The more you are given, the more you are asked. You should be more responsible for the more you are given. It's not a curse, but it's like a weight. If you are given more, more is expected from you, and it should be. It's that simple, he says. In unity, we are given the knowledge that our minds make a difference, that the power of our practice transforms the world. That is a great responsibility. It is ours. It is our duty to live it, to challenge reality, to express it, to teach it, to share it, to make it come alive in our world. In John 14, the disciples were asking Jesus about where he's going, and they said, how do we know the way? And Jesus said to them, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. He goes on to say, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. A lot of people use this passage to segregate and to separate, to annihilate and to destroy the oneness of God consciousness. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the light. When asked, how do I get there? How do I get to where you're going? Jesus' consciousness, the master teacher's consciousness, was one that was one with the Father, the source. So in oneness with the source, that I am that becomes each one of us as we acknowledge the oneness of all life, as we acknowledge that we are not separate, as we acknowledge that the same source that sourced me into being, sourced you into being, them into being, every bit of creation into being. When I am in that consciousness, I become more than my human condition. I become more than a separate self. I become my I am nature, my awakened nature. The nature of the highest consciousness, God consciousness, I become that. And yes, absolutely, only through that consciousness. That is the way, that is the truth, that is the light. Only through the consciousness of the light will we be in and with our source. And folks, that has nothing to do with religion. Has anyone ever said that passage has nothing to do with religion? That has to do with our spiritual condition. I end with the words of Buckminster Fuller. He said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Namaste.